When you've been in this game long enough, you start to realize that the loudest voices are not always the most enlightened. They're often the most insecure. They fill the silence with noise because silence exposes their emptiness. And when you begin to strip away the marketing, the motivational slogans, and the highlight reels, what you find underneath the mentor archetype isn't wisdom, it's dependency. A while back, I sat across from a mentor whose name you'd recognize if I said it. For years, he sold courses, signals, and strategies that promised freedom but quietly built cages. Yet, when the cameras were off, when there was no audience to applaud the illusion, he admitted something that changed how I view the entire mentorship space forever. He said, "I don't actually trade much anymore. It's too unstable. I teach because it's predictable." That statement hung in the air like a confession from a weary priest. It wasn't arrogance, it was fatigue. And in that fatigue, I saw the truth about how traders are misled. Not always by malice, but by men who lost faith in their own ability to survive the chaos they once claimed to master. He had built a business around what used to be his dream. He'd replaced risk with comfort and conviction with control. That's the hidden tragedy of the guru scam. It's not just the money they take, it's the belief they steal. They teach traders to outsource their conviction, to rent confidence through signals, and to buy into the illusion of progress. But the worst part isn't even that. The worst part is that the followers start believing they need the system more than they need structure. As we talked, I could feel his honesty cutting through layers of my own past beliefs. Because I, too, once thought mentorship was the bridge between confusion and clarity. But what I discovered that day was something far more complex. Mentorship without personal structure doesn't create freedom. It creates hierarchy. One side dependent, the other sustained by that dependency. He admitted that he knew this dynamic existed. He said, "If I taught traders how to think, I'd lose them. But if I kept them busy chasing new tactics, they'd never leave." That one line is the DNA of the modern trading industry. It's not about helping you win, it's about keeping you chasing. Because chasing is profitable. In that moment, I realized that most traders aren't trapped because they're undisciplined. They're trapped because they've been trained to see learning as consumption instead of transformation. They collect information the way hoarders collect possessions. Each new idea promises relief, but none creates order. I remember asking him why he kept doing it, even after realizing the damage. His answer wasn't what I expected. He said, "Because structure doesn't sell. Chaos does. People think they want discipline, but they really want dopamine." And he was right. The industry doesn't just sell knowledge, it sells the emotional illusion of progress. It sells you the feeling of control, not the architecture of it. But here's what most traders never see. Every successful trader you admire eventually reaches the same fork in the road. Continue performing for others or start structuring for yourself. One path leads to fame, the other leads to freedom. Most choose fame. Few survive freedom. That interview wasn't loud, it wasn't emotional. It was quiet, painfully honest. And in that stillness, I could sense that even he missed what he once had. The thrill of creation, the uncertainty that forced growth, the chaos that demanded clarity. He had traded it all for predictability. As we parted, I couldn't shake the realization that the entire mentorship ecosystem thrives on the lie that knowledge transfer equals transformation. But transformation doesn't happen through imitation. It happens through structure. Structure isn't about memorizing rules. It's about building frameworks that make those rules irrelevant. When your behavior is aligned with your model, discipline becomes automatic. That's the paradox most mentors never teach. The goal is not to follow a system, it's to become one. The structure must outgrow the teacher. And that's exactly what the industry fears most, a trader who no longer needs permission to act intentionally. I went home that night thinking about the countless traders stuck in the loop, buying course after course, watching live streams, chasing signals, and it hit me. They're not addicted to trading, they're addicted to hope. But hope without structure is just emotional caffeine. It keeps you awake, but never awake enough to change. And that's what the guru scam feeds on, the endless renewal of false hope. Because when your identity as a trader is built on needing someone else to tell you when to act, you've already surrendered the most sacred thing you have, your agency. That night, I wrote a single line in my journal. Dependency is the death of creation. Because once you depend on external direction, you stop designing your own model. You stop innovating. You stop thinking. You become mechanical, not intentional. But there's a strange irony here. That mentor wasn't entirely wrong. Chaos does sell, because chaos offers a sense of movement. It keeps you busy, engaged, distracted. It lets you believe you're improving because you're always doing something. And in a world where progress feels slow, doing something feels better than doing the right thing. Yet what most don't see is that the chaos of the market is neutral. It's our unstructured behavior that turns it into torment. The same volatility that destroys the impulsive trader empowers the structured one. Because volatility doesn't reward effort, it rewards order. I began to understand that the real scam wasn't the selling of signals. It was the selling of avoidance. They weren't just selling you direction. They were selling you the illusion that you could bypass uncertainty. They tell you, follow this and you won't have to think. Use this and you won't have to feel. But in doing that, they rob you of the very muscle that trading is supposed to build, the ability to think under uncertainty. Trading isn't about predicting movement. It's about structuring your mind to withstand movement. And that structure cannot be bought. It must be built. That conversation shifted something permanent in me. It reminded me that mentorship is sacred when it serves as a bridge, but it becomes corrupt when it becomes a leash. True mentors don't create dependency. They create design. They teach you how to think, not what to think. They push you to confront your own impulses instead of hiding behind theirs. The guru scam thrives because traders fear responsibility. They'd rather outsource the burden of thinking than risk the discomfort of design. But every intentional trader eventually learns that responsibility is not a weight, it's a weapon. By the end of that interview, I no longer saw the mentor as a villain. I saw him as a mirror. He was simply the reflection of a system built on human weakness, a system that exploits impatience, glorifies shortcuts, and monetizes emotion. And perhaps that's why so few traders ever make it through. Because the path to freedom requires rejecting everything that feels easy. That's when I understood. The true rebellion in trading is not against brokers, gurus, or algorithms. It's against our own desire for ease. The market doesn't destroy the undisciplined trader. Their own unstructured identity does. When you finally understand how much of trading is psychological design, you stop looking at the market as the battlefield and start seeing your own structure as the weapon. That's what most traders never reach. The level where structure itself becomes the discipline, where process replaces pressure, and where conviction is no longer something you chase, but something that flows through the architecture you built. That mentor I spoke to, he once had that flow. He described it vividly. He said there was a time when he could sit in front of the charts for hours, not out of addiction, but out of communion. He said, back then, I didn't trade to win. I traded to understand. The money was just proof that I understood something deeper. I remember the pause that followed because you could hear regret woven through his voice. Somewhere along the way, the intention that made him a trader was replaced by the comfort of being followed. That moment stayed with me because it revealed something subtle but profound. That when the why of a trader collapses, the how eventually disintegrates too. You can't sustain structure without meaning. You can't sustain consistency without intention. Every system that loses its philosophy eventually turns mechanical, and everything mechanical eventually breaks. It made me realize why so many traders fail even when they follow rules, because they're trying to imitate a system that was never theirs. They treat someone else's model like a magic formula instead of a reference framework. They build on borrowed conviction, hoping it will carry them to clarity. But conviction doesn't transfer. It's earned. That's the great paradox. Traders want certainty, but certainty only comes from within the structure you've tested through repetition. You can't buy that. You can't skip the pain of construction. Every shortcut is just another delay in disguise. I remember asking him what he thought the real solution was for traders like that, the ones caught in the loop of dependency. He smiled, half in humility, half in resignation, and said, "The solution is structure." But structure doesn't attract followers. It creates independence. And independence doesn't make you money unless you're willing to lose your audience. That truth cut deeper than I expected, because it meant that every real mentor has to choose between fame and freedom, between followers and structure. And that's a war that most don't have the courage to fight. But I left that conversation realizing something else too. That you, the trader listening to this right now, are already standing at that same crossroads. Whether you realize it or not, you've been choosing every single day between what's easy and what's intentional, between consuming and constructing, between following and designing. The guru scam isn't about fraud, it's about philosophy. It's the philosophy of dependency, the belief that someone else's certainty can replace your own chaos. But it never can, because chaos isn't your enemy, it's your mirror. It shows you what's unstructured within you. The market doesn't test your strategy, it tests your structure. When you fail in trading, you're not failing against the market. You're failing against your own lack of internal order. Every hesitation, every impulsive entry, every premature exit, they're not market errors, they're structural fractures. And the only way to fix them is to build something that can hold the weight of your own uncertainty. Structure isn't sexy, it's not viral. It doesn't feed the dopamine that the industry lives on, but it's the only thing that survives chaos. It's the quiet architecture that holds the line when emotion storms the gates. And that's why most traders never get there, because structure demands consistency, and consistency requires surrender. You have to surrender your impulses, your need for constant novelty, your addiction to movement. You have to be willing to become bored in the right direction. That's something the mentor and I agreed on, that boredom is the hidden currency of mastery. Because the longer you can stay within the parameters of your structure without needing emotional stimulation, the stronger your command of probability becomes. Every great trader eventually learns to respect stillness as a form of strength. He told me he envied that now, the boredom, the repetition, the process. He said he missed the feeling of being a student of structure, not a performer of perception. That line stayed with me for days because it made me realize that even those who appear at the top often wish they could return to the bottom, to the purity of learning before ego polluted the process. The conversation taught me that traders don't actually want freedom. They want the feeling of freedom. They want the emotion of progress, not the discipline of it. But those two things are not the same. The first makes you dependent on outcomes. The second makes you dependent on order. And order is the foundation of every real transformation. When a trader's structure matures, emotion loses its power. That's the death of impulse, not through suppression, but through integration. Because the trader no longer needs to resist emotion. They've designed their structure in such a way that emotion has no leverage. That's what separates the intentional trader from the emotional trader. The former builds systems that account for uncertainty, while the latter keeps trying to emotionally manage it. One evolves through design, the other collapses through reaction. I thought about how many traders are stuck in that cycle, not because they lack discipline, but because they're disciplined in the wrong direction. They follow rules without understanding the reason those rules exist. They obey their mentors, but never build their own foundation. And that's why they keep resetting, relapsing, and repeating. Structure, when built properly, becomes your behavioral compass. It trains the nervous system to trust the model more than the emotion. It creates predictability not in the market, but in your own responses to it. That's the highest form of consistency, when your reactions become so structured that probability bends in your favor. That mentor told me something that day that I'll never forget. The real edge isn't knowledge, it's nervous system design. At first, it sounded too abstract, but later, I understood exactly what he meant. Your nervous system is the first market you must master, because if it can't stay calm under uncertainty, you'll never hold structure long enough to reach consistency. That's what makes the guru scam so dangerous. It keeps traders chasing external stability instead of building internal structure. It conditions them to believe that certainty comes from information, when in truth, Certainty is the byproduct of internal order. You don't control the market, you control your model. And your model controls your probability. Everything else is noise. That's the hierarchy of intentional trading, a hierarchy that no mentor can sell because it must be lived. Every part of it is forged in the quiet repetition of structure until your behavior becomes a reflection of your model, not your mood. By the time the interview ended, I could feel that we had both come to the same realization, that mentorship should never end in dependence. It should dissolve into design. A real mentor's success is measured by how unnecessary they become, because the highest form of guidance is one that returns the student back to themselves. Structured, sovereign, and self-directed. That's what it means to trade intentionally. It's not about control, it's about authorship. The trader becomes the architect of their behavior, the designer of their execution, and the commander of their probability. That's the rebellion against the guru scam. Not outrage, not exposure, but elevation. The truth is, every trader will one day meet that moment where everything they once believed begins to dissolve. The indicators that once felt like certainty begin to look like noise. The mentors that once felt like light begin to cast shadows. And the only question left is, what do you stand on when everything external collapses? That is where structure begins. Not when you learn it, but when you need it. Structure is born out of necessity. The necessity to survive your own uncertainty. It's the architecture you build when you finally realize no one is coming to save you. When I left that interview, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. Because I finally understood that the guru scam doesn't need to be fought. It needs to be outgrown. You don't break from dependency by rejecting the mentor. You break free by reconstructing your own design. You stop following signals, not because they're wrong, but because you've built a structure that makes them irrelevant. That's the quiet power of intentionality. It's not loud, it doesn't shout, it doesn't need validation. It's internal, it's systemic, it's a kind of peace that comes from alignment. When what you believe, what you build, and what you behave finally speak the same language. Most traders never reach that alignment because they keep mistaking excitement for growth. They believe movement means progress. But chaos can move too. Confusion can be busy. Impulse can be energetic. Structure, on the other hand, is slow, deliberate, measured. It's a kind of sacred slowness that most aren't patient enough to endure. That mentor said something near the end of our talk that I'll never forget. He said, "The truth doesn't sell, but it saves." At that moment, I knew he was talking about more than trading. He was talking about life, about every place where we seek shortcuts instead of systems, validation instead of values, emotion instead of order. Traders often think they're chasing freedom, but freedom without structure is just chaos in disguise. True freedom, the kind that sustains, comes from knowing that you've designed your process to hold even when you don't feel strong. Because structure doesn't remove uncertainty, it absorbs it. It gives chaos a container. It gives probability a pathway. It gives discipline a body to live in. That's the design every intentional trader must one day build, a structure that outlasts emotion, outlasts mentorship, and outlasts uncertainty itself. I remember the look in his eyes when I asked what he would do differently if he could go back. He paused, then said softly, "I'd stop performing and start building again." That line felt heavier than it sounded, because beneath it was a truth that most never face. That the applause of others can easily drown the voice of your own design. He had built fame but lost form. He had gained followers but lost freedom. And in that paradox, he became a prisoner of his own image. Every trader listening to this needs to hear that truth. Because in your own way, you're facing the same test. Every time you post a trade for validation, every time you chase a win for affirmation, every time you follow a signal to feel safe, you're feeding the same illusion. Freedom isn't found in being right. It's found in being aligned. Because alignment means you no longer need the outcome to confirm your identity. You've built your identity inside your structure, not outside it. That's why structure is sacred. It's not just a system of execution, it's a philosophy of existence. It's how you bring order into chaos. It's how you turn probability into purpose. It's how you stop trading to win and start trading to understand. The traders who last, the ones who truly evolve, are not the ones who mastered the market. They're the ones who mastered themselves within the market. They stopped looking for a mentor to lead them and started looking for a structure to hold them. That's what I took away from that conversation. That every mentor, every course, every book, every model, they all eventually point you back to the same place, your own mind, because your mind is the final market. Every price movement is a mirror. Every setup is a reflection. Every result is feedback. The mentor confessed his fatigue because he had been living outside that mirror for too long. He had become detached from the structure that once made him authentic. But in his confession, there was redemption, because even he recognized that what he lost wasn't skill, it was sincerity. And that's what this entire journey as a trader is about, returning to sincerity. To trade not to impress, not to escape, not to prove, but to build. Because when you trade from sincerity, you trade from structure. Your actions become deliberate. Your outcomes become data. Your process becomes peace. So if you're listening right now, understand this. Your greatest breakthrough won't come from a new strategy. It'll come the moment you stop outsourcing your conviction, the moment you stop needing to be told what to do, and start designing the system that tells you how to act. That's when trading stops being reactive and becomes intentional. That's when the noise fades. That's when probability begins to bend, not because the market changed, but because you did. The mentor's words were meant as a confession, but I took them as a charge. Because if one of the most recognized mentors in the industry could admit that the entire ecosystem runs on dependency, then it means there's room for a new paradigm. One built not on manipulation, but on mastery. Not on signals, but on structure. That's what this channel was built to stand for, to awaken traders from dependency and lead them into design. Because the world doesn't need more followers, it needs more architects. Traders who can build their conviction, construct their identity, and design their consistency. In that moment, I realized something deeply profound. The true mentor is not the one who gives you answers. It's the one who gives you back your questions and then teaches you how to structure them until the market itself becomes your teacher. And maybe that's how all true mentorship should end, not in loyalty, but in liberation. Because when you've built your structure well enough, you won't need anyone to tell you when to buy or sell. You'll already know, not because of arrogance, but because of alignment. Not because of luck, but because of design. That's what separates those who merely trade from those who command probability. It's not intelligence. It's not timing. It's structure. The invisible discipline that holds steady when everything else shakes. The guru scam will always exist because chaos will always be marketable. But as long as traders keep awakening to design, dependency will keep dying in silence. Because truth doesn't need to trend, it only needs to transform. So when you walk back to your chart after this, don't look for a signal, look for a structure. Don't look for direction, look for design. And most importantly, don't look for someone to follow. Look for who you must become, because that's the real secret they'll never sell you. Once you build your own structure, you can never be scammed again.